The first time it happened, the hunters thought the human had used some kind of chemical lure. Otherwise, how could a clutch of predator cubs, known for ripping apart anything smaller than a battle drone, decide to curl up against a strange two-legged alien as though he were their den mother? The canyon winds howled that morning, scattering dust through the outpost gates. Sergeant Elias Trent was already irritated, brushing grit from his eyes as he checked the outer perimeter sensors. His helmet visor flickered with static again. Typical, the entire base had been rushed into existence after scouts reported predator nests too close to the settlement. Half-built walls, shoddy power lines, comm units that failed every few hours. It was, as the engineers liked to mutter, one good accident away from complete collapse. Elias didn't mind. He was used to broken places. He'd grown up in them. What he wasn't used to was silence. The predators were supposed to howl, stalk, scratch at the barriers, remind the humans why this barren planet had been labeled extreme hazard zone. Instead, he heard nothing. Not until the sudden scuffle of claws on stone reached him. He dropped low, rifle up, instincts sharp. 3 forms darted across the canyon floor, small, lean, and fast. Cubs. Predator cubs. Their eyes glowed faintly in the dusty light, jaws snapping as they tumbled into view. Elias hissed a curse under his breath. Of all the damned days! Normally, cubs this young stayed hidden in dens, protected by packs. Which meant either the pack was hunting nearby, or something had gone wrong. Either way, cubs were dangerous enough on their own. Their claws were sharp, their bites carried venom, and even half-grown, they were quicker than most soldiers could track. He steadied his rifle. Regulations were clear, no hesitation. Predator species were extermination-level threats, not to be coddled. But then the strangest thing happened. Instead of charging or scattering, the 3 cubs bolted directly toward him. Elias braced, finger tightening on the trigger. But before he could fire, the first one skidded to a stop at his boots, whining like a lost pup. The second rammed into his shin, claws scraping his armor but not cutting. The third, damn thing had the audacity, leapt straight into his lap as he crouched, curling its spiked tail around his arm like a child clutching a blanket. Elias froze. What the hell? He expected an ambush. He expected the pack to erupt from the rocks, tearing him apart, while the cubs served as distraction. But the canyon remained still. No shadows moved. No growls echoed. Instead, the cubs pressed against him, trembling, as if terrified. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. Elias muttered, staring down at the sharp-toothed little monsters. This is not regulation. His calm crackled alive. Sergeant Trent, report. It was Lieutenant Core, her voice clipped and suspicious. Elias hesitated. He looked at the cubs. One blinked up at him with glowing yellow eyes, pupils narrowing, jaw clicking nervously. Another made a soft keening sound that, if he didn't know better, sounded downright pitiful. The third had buried its snout against his chest plate. We might have a situation, Elias said slowly. Core's tone sharpened. Predators? Yeah, Elias said. But they're not hostile. Not hostile? Core repeated, incredulous. Trent, they're Apex-class Xenofauna. If you're hesitating, I'll deploy. No, Elias cut in quickly. Don't send anyone yet. Trust me. If they were hostile, I'd already be bleeding. They're sticking to me. Like I'm there. I don't know, babysitter. There was a pause on the channel. Then laughter burst through, not Core's, but one of the privates who'd clearly overheard. Babysitter Trent! Someone crowed. First human to adopt predator spawn! Elias groaned. Shut up. But even as the soldiers mocked over comms, Elias felt a strange weight in the moment. The cubs weren't acting out of randomness. They weren't stupid. Something had driven them here. Something worse than him. He glanced at the canyon again, uneasy. Fine, Core snapped finally. Bring them in. Alive. Command will want a look. And, Sergeant? If this turns out to be a trick, you'll answer for it personally. Copy, Elias said grimly. Getting the cubs back wasn't easy. They refused to leave his side, nipping at anyone else who came close. When one of the medics reached out, a cub snapped its jaws so fast the man recoiled, swearing. Yet with Elias, they were docile. Obedient even. Like he carried some invisible scent of safety. By the time he marched through the outpost gates with 3 predator cubs clinging to him, the entire unit had gathered to stare. The creatures hissed at the crowd, but when Elias patted one's bony ridge, it went quiet. Soldiers exchanged looks that wavered between awe and suspicion. Unbelievable, Cor muttered, stepping forward. They're supposed to be untamable. You touch one and it bites your hand clean off. But you… She narrowed her eyes at Elias. You're sure you didn't use pheromone packs? Stims? Some off-the-books trick? Elias scowled. I didn't use anything. Then explain this. I can't. He glanced down at the cubs, who blinked innocently up at him. Maybe they chose me. The soldiers laughed again, but uneasily this time. Because in the galaxy's records, predators never chose. They killed. They hunted. They destroyed colonies. And if cubs had chosen a human, then the rules weren't rules anymore. That night, Elias sat in the barracks with 3 pairs of glowing eyes fixed on him. They refused to eat the raw protein slabs offered by handlers. They refused water bowls unless Elias set them down. They refused sleep unless they could curl against his cot. He stared at the ceiling, listening to their faint breathing. The situation was absurd. Dangerous. Possibly career-ending. But he couldn't shake the feeling, whatever nightmare had driven them to him, wasn't finished. And the cubs weren't going to let go. The jungle never stayed silent for long, but this silence was different, it was focused. Predators moved in shadows, shapes brushing the undergrowth, waiting, watching. And somehow, all of them were circling the small camp where Marcus sat with 3 cubs nestled against him like oversized house cats that hadn't yet learned their claws could disembowel. The strange part wasn't that predators prowled nearby, it was that they stayed back. Not a single one approached the circle of firelight. And Marcus knew why. The cubs. They were sending some kind of unspoken message into the canopy. Even when they shifted in their sleep, low vibrations hummed in their throats, a sound Marcus felt more than heard. And whatever it was, it kept the other predators at bay. He leaned against a log, running a hand through his hair. So you 3 are like royalty here, huh? He whispered. One cub stretched and pressed its snout into his chest, rumbling deeper. Marcus chuckled nervously. Right. Royalty with teeth. When morning came, the cubs weren't about to let him go. He tried. He nudged them gently off his legs, stood up, and shouldered his pack. But the moment he stepped toward the edge of camp, the cubs followed, patting on oversized paws. Nope. You're staying here. Your mom's probably looking for you, and me? I'm not on the menu. They ignored him completely. By noon, Marcus realized he'd somehow become a foster parent against his will. The cubs followed him through dense underbrush, whining if he got too far ahead, growling at any wildlife that drew too close. It was comical. Here he was, a single human with nothing but a survival kit, and yet the entire death world seemed to tiptoe around him because of the trio of alien toddlers glued to his heels. It should have been funny. Instead, it terrified him. Because if cubs existed, so did their parents. And if the parents found him with them. Marcus tried everything. He tossed strips of dried ration meat far from the path. He hissed, clapped, shouted. He even climbed a low tree, thinking they'd lose interest. Instead, the cubs sat beneath the trunk, whining pitifully until he climbed down again. One of them even tried to scale after him, nearly impaling itself on bark thorns. Fine, he shouted. Fine. You win. You stick with me, but if Mommy comes back, you're explaining this mess. That was when he noticed the drones. They weren't human, and they weren't natural. Metallic glints flickered in the canopy, faint hums riding the wind. Surveillance machines, maybe? Marcus crouched, shielding his face with a hand, pretending not to notice. But the cubs noticed. Their ears perked, Their throats vibrated with warning growls. "Yeah, I see it too," Marcus muttered. "Which means someone's watching. Someone smart." He adjusted his pack and started walking again, faster this time. The drones didn't attack. They just followed. Recording. Studying. That night, as he made camp beneath a fallen tree trunk, Marcus set up motion alarms with string and empty ration tins. He didn't trust the silence anymore. The cubs curled against him again, their body heat keeping him warm. As he drifted into uneasy sleep, a thought burned in his mind. What if the drones aren't here for me? The answer came at dawn. A sound like thunder split the sky, drawing his eyes upward. Not thunder, engines. Ships. Sleek, silver craft descending low, disturbing the canopy with a gale-force downdraft. The cubs bolted upright, hackles raised, growls snapping into full-throated roars. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," Marcus whispered, crouching and holding them close. "Easy. Just machines." But it wasn't easy. The cubs' growls weren't fear, they were rage. The ships landed in a clearing ahead, 3 of them, angular with armored plating and weapons that glistened like obsidian. The insignia painted across their hulls wasn't familiar to Marcus. But the way his gut twisted told him everything he needed to know. These weren't human explorers. Figures disembarked, aliens, tall and thin, wrapped in armor like bone plating. Their movements were sharp, disciplined. Soldiers. Marcus froze behind cover. He knew one rule about survival: don't be the first thing hostile strangers see. The cubs didn't care about rules. They bolted straight for the clearing. "Damn it!" Marcus cursed, scrambling after them. The aliens noticed the cubs immediately. Their postures shifted, excited, almost triumphant. One barked something in a language Marcus didn't understand, and 2 soldiers raised weapons that shimmered with an electric charge. "No!" Marcus hissed, charging forward. He didn't think. He just moved. Before the aliens could fire, Marcus leapt into the clearing, arms wide. "Stop! Don't touch them!" he shouted, though he knew they wouldn't understand his words. The aliens froze. Then, almost comically, they lowered their weapons, not in surrender, but in curiosity. One tilted its head, chittering something to the others. The leader pointed. Not at the cubs. At him. Marcus's skin prickled. They weren't after the cubs. They were after whoever the cubs had chosen. And somehow, impossibly, they'd chosen him. The aliens began advancing slowly, hands out, not hostile but intent. Like scientists approaching a rare specimen. Marcus stepped back, hard hammering. "Nope. No way. You're not taking me." The cubs circled him, snarling, their fur bristling. They understood the threat. They'd chosen their side. That was when Marcus realized he wasn't just caught between predators and aliens. He was standing at the center of something far bigger, something the cubs represented, something the aliens desperately wanted. The soldiers lunged. Marcus grabbed a branch from the fire pit and swung it hard, sparks trailing. "Stay back!" The cubs roared in unison, a bone-shaking sound that rippled through the forest. The very trees seemed to tremble. And for the first time, Marcus saw fear flicker across the aliens' faces. But fear didn't stop them. The leader barked another command. More soldiers poured from the ship. Marcus's throat went dry. He was hopelessly outnumbered. And yet, he wasn't alone. The cubs pressed tight against him, rumbling deep, as though promising something he couldn't yet understand. Marcus squared his shoulders, branch raised like a sword. "All right then," he whispered. "Let's see how far we can push this." The clearing erupted into chaos. The night air was split by a roar so deep it rattled the very bones of the valley. Kale froze mid-step. The predator cubs pressed against his legs as though trying to burrow into him. The sound didn't just come from one direction, it reverberated from the mountains themselves, echoing in waves that made the ground feel alive. Something was coming. Kale's gut twisted. He'd heard echoes of such roars in old recordings of alien predators, but this was deeper, older, more primal. It wasn't the kind of sound that simply warned intruders. It was a declaration of dominion. Whoever, or whatever, owned that roar had just announced that the valley was not Kale's to traverse. The cubs whimpered. He knelt, brushing a hand over the thick fur of the boldest of the three. "Easy, little ones," he whispered. "If that's who I think it is, then we're in bigger trouble than I wanted to admit." He'd suspected from the start, the cubs weren't orphans. Their parent, a full-grown adult predator, was out here somewhere. And now Kale was certain, it was hunting. The bushes shuddered to his left. A shadow passed through the tree-line, impossibly massive. Twin golden eyes blinked in the dark, and for a breath Kale swore they were suns staring directly into him. The predator emerged. Its body stretched nearly 4 meters long, muscles rippling under striped fur. Its fangs caught the moonlight, and claws gouged the earth like blades as it stepped closer. Every instinct screamed at Kale to drop the cubs and run. But the cubs clung tighter, trembling, their little tails lashing nervously. "Of course," Kale muttered under his breath. "You don't want to go back, do you?" The adult predator's head tilted. Its gaze swept from Kale's face to the cubs huddled at his feet. The snarl building in its throat was almost too much to bear, but Kale forced himself to stand his ground. He knew enough about animals back on Earth. Running only invited pursuit. Predators respected stillness, the refusal to yield. "All right," Kale said softly, more to himself than to the beast. "If this is the confrontation, let's make it count." The predator stepped forward, low and deliberate. The cubs whimpered louder, and in a flash of realization Kale understood. The cubs weren't afraid of him being attacked. They were afraid the predator would take them away. For the first time, Kale grasped the full weight of his situation. He wasn't just a human lost on some alien world, improvising survival. He was standing between 3 predator cubs and their parent, because the cubs had chosen him over their own blood. The parent predator's growl deepened. Its fangs dripped with saliva. The cubs yelped, pressing tighter against Kale. Kale's mind spun. He didn't have weapons, no plasma rifle or energy shield like soldiers in the vids. All he had were his instincts, a handful of makeshift tools, and the raw audacity of being human. And maybe that was enough. He took a slow step forward. The cubs clung tighter, one even wrapping its tiny claws around his boot. The parent predator's eyes narrowed, tracking him. Kale lifted his hands slowly, palms open. "Look," he whispered. "I'm not your enemy. But I'm not giving them up either. Not unless they choose it." It was madness, speaking to an alien predator, as though it could understand words. But the cub's behavior made him wonder if there was more intelligence in the species than the council catalogue suggested. The parent predator lowered itself, muscles coiled. Kale recognized that stance. Back home, lions and tigers had crouched the same way before pouncing. His heartbeat thundered. If it leapt, he wouldn't survive the first strike. Think, Kale. Think. What's the one thing humans do that predators never expect? He crouched slowly, picking up a branch from the forest floor. The predator's gaze followed the motion, head tilting. Then, without warning, Kale snapped the branch across his knee. The crack echoed like a gunshot. The predator froze. Its ears flicked back, golden eyes widening. Kale grinned through the fear. "Yeah, you weren't expecting that, were you?" Predators understood strength. They understood sudden, decisive action. Kale held the broken halves of the branch like weapons, his stance unflinching. The parent predator growled, the sound uncertain now, almost confused. It sniffed the air, gaze darting to its cubs. The little ones didn't move. They didn't run to it. They stayed by Kale's side. That was the tipping point. The predator's gaze snapped back to Kale, a storm of fury and wounded pride burning in those golden eyes. It roared again, louder than before, the sound rattling leaves off the trees. Then it charged. Kale's brain shut off. His body moved on instinct. He hurled one half of the branch directly at its eyes. The predator flinched, the wood striking across its snout. It staggered, but momentum still carried it forward. Kale dropped low, rolling to the side, dragging the cubs with him in a desperate motion. The predator's claws ripped through the space he'd been standing in a heartbeat before, shredding the ground like paper. The cubs squealed, clinging to him in terror. Kale's lungs burned as he scrambled to his feet. "Move, move, move!" he hissed at them, though he knew they couldn't understand. The predator wheeled around, tail lashing like a whip. It snarled, blood dripping from its nose where the branch had struck. Kale had seconds. Maybe less. He grabbed a stone from the ground, sharp-edged, fist-sized. His mind screamed at him. This was suicide, throwing rocks at a monster, but he clenched his teeth and hurled it anyway. The stone cracked against the predator's jaw. Not enough to stop it, but enough to enrage it. It lunged again, claws tearing trenches into the earth. Kale did the only thing left. He roared back. The sound tore out of his throat raw and primal, shocking even himself. The cubs froze, eyes wide. And for a split second, the predator hesitated. It wasn't much, but it was there. That was all Kale needed. He grabbed a fallen branch thick with resin, struck flint from his pocket, and sparked flame. The branch caught fire hissing up its length. Kale swung it like a torch, the blaze snapping through the night. Predators feared fire. That much was universal. The beast screeched, rearing back as flames danced inches from its face. The golden eyes narrowed, rage burning in them. But beneath the rage, Kale saw something else, recognition. The predator understood. Kale wasn't prey. Not anymore. The standoff stretched for endless seconds. Kale held the burning torch high, the cubs pressed against his legs, the predator's breath steaming in the cold air. The firelight painted the scene in flickering gold and shadow, primal and timeless. Finally, the predator stepped back. Its growl deepened, then softened into a low rumble, something closer to disappointment than fury. Its gaze lingered on the cubs, for a heartbeat longer. And then, with a final snarl, it turned. Muscles rippling, tail lashing, it disappeared into the tree-line, swallowed by darkness. Kale exhaled so hard he nearly collapsed. His legs shook, lungs burning from the adrenaline. He dropped the torch into the dirt, stamping it out before it spread. The cubs didn't move from his side. He crouched, resting his forehead against the boldest cub's fur. "We're alive," he whispered hoarsely. "Somehow, we're alive." But his heart knew this wasn't over. The predator had retreated, not surrendered. It would return. And when it did, the real battle for survival would begin. For now, though, the cubs chose him. They had faced their parents' wrath and refused to leave. And Kale, against all odds, had faced the galaxy's apex predator with nothing but fire, defiance, and human audacity, and lived to tell the tale. The ship trembled as if it too feared what was coming. Human and predator cub alike crouched behind overturned crates and shattered panels, their bodies tight with tension. A faint vibration thrummed through the hull, steady and menacing. The enemy ship was docking. The airlock warning lights pulsed crimson, bathing the dim cargo hold in a heartbeat rhythm that set nerves alight. Every sound was amplified, the hiss of the emergency seals, the scratch of a claw against the floor, even the whisper of the cub's anxious breathing. "Stay behind me," Daniel said, low but firm, his voice steady as granite. His rifle hummed as he primed its plasma core, the faint blue glow a sharp contrast to the red lighting. The cubs didn't argue. They pressed closer, their predator instincts telling them that survival lay in proximity to the human. The first metallic thud echoed from the docking clamp. The cubs flinched. Daniel didn't. He leveled the rifle at the corridor and exhaled slowly. His heart should have been racing. Instead, it was oddly calm, as if the world had slowed and offered him a choice, fight or break. He knew which one he'd take. The bulkhead tore open with a shriek of metal. An armored figure stormed through, towering slavers, their insected limbs glinting with biosteel plating. They carried weapons meant to terrify entire villages, their carapaces etched with the marks of kills. Daniel's rifle barked blue fire before they'd even finished stepping inside. The first invader dropped, its torso smoking and split open. The second fell moments later, caught in a spray that burned through its leg joints. But they weren't the only ones coming. More poured through, and with each new shape, the cargo hold seemed smaller. The cubs whimpered, but one, the smallest, snarled, baring its tiny fangs. Daniel almost smiled. Even cornered, they had fight in them. A blast from the enemy's cannon seared the wall near Daniel's head. He ducked and rolled, firing in return. Sparks rained down from shattered conduits, and smoke thickened the air. His lungs burned, but he pushed through it, aiming carefully, methodically. For every alien that entered, two fell. For every alien that advanced, they paid in blood and screams. Then the real monster stepped through. It dwarfed the others, a commander clad in plates of bone armor, and wielding a plasma axe longer than Daniel was tall. Its mandibles clicked in grim amusement as it surveyed the scene, its dead scattered across the floor, its foes reduced to a single human and a cluster of frightened predator cubs. Daniel tightened his grip. "Guess it's you and me, Bug." The commander charged, its footsteps shaking the deck plates. Daniel fired shot after shot, but the creature's armor absorbed most of the energy, glowing faintly with each impact. The cub screamed as it closed the distance, raising the plasma axe for a killing blow. Daniel waited until the last moment. He dropped flat, the axe cleaving through the crate where his head had been. Sparks burst as the weapon embedded deep. Daniel surged upward, jamming his rifle into the exposed joint between the alien's chest plates, and fired point blank. The bolt tore through, black ichor spraying across the floor. The alien staggered, but it wasn't dead. It roared, wrenching the axe free, and backhanded Daniel with enough force to send him crashing into the bulkhead. Pain exploded through his ribs. He slid to the floor, gasping, blood flecking his lips. His rifle skittered across the deck, too far to reach. The commander advanced, raising its weapon again. The cubs howled, their fear shifting into fury. Before Daniel could stop them, they hurled themselves at the alien's legs, tiny claws digging into joints, sharp teeth snapping at exposed flesh. The monster roared in disbelief as three small bodies clung and tore at it with savage desperation. Daniel forced himself upright. Every bone screamed in protest, but he pushed on. His gaze flicked to the rifle, too far. But near him, half buried in the debris, was one of the enemy's dropped weapons. A wicked energy pistol. His hand closed around it just as the commander kicked two of the cubs aside, sending them tumbling in pained yelps. "No!" Daniel growled, and fired. The pistol's blast tore through the alien's throat. Its mandibles froze mid-click, its weapon clattered to the deck, and then its massive body collapsed in a heap that shook the floor. Silence followed. The air was thick with smoke and blood, the acrid stench of battle searing every breath. Daniel staggered, then dropped to his knees beside the cubs. They whimpered but were alive, their small eyes wide with a mixture of terror and relief. The smallest crawled onto his lap, pressing its face against his chest as though seeking proof that he still breathed. He chuckled weakly. "Yeah, I'm here. Not going anywhere." The surviving slavers, seeing their leader fall, retreated in chaos. Their shouts echoed down the corridors, their boots pounding as they fled back to their ship. The docking clamps disengaged, and the enemy vessel pulled away, vanishing into the void like a wounded predator slinking into the night. When silence truly settled, Daniel slumped against the wall, exhaustion threatening to drag him under. The cubs gathered around him, forming a circle of warmth and loyalty. Their species might have been feared apex predators across countless worlds, but in this moment, they were just children, and they had chosen him. Hours later, the rescue arrived. The Allied fleet, long delayed, dropped out of warp and swept the wreckage. Marines stormed the hold, weapons raised, only to freeze at the sight before them, a human sitting bloodied and battered, surrounded by predator cubs who refused to leave his side. One Marine lowered his rifle. "Sir, they're clinging to him." Another whispered, awestruck. "Predator cubs, protecting a human?" The cubs hissed at the soldiers who tried to separate them. One even bit a gauntlet, refusing to be pried away. Daniel, half conscious, cracked a grin. "Told you, they chose me." News of the event spread faster than light. Across the galaxy, species who once trembled at the predators now trembled for another reason. Their cubs had chosen humanity. Scholars debated what it meant. Military strategists reevaluated their assumptions. And parents whispered stories of the bond between a human and predator children who refused to let go, even when fleets and armies demanded otherwise. Daniel recovered, those scars marked his body as reminders. The cubs remained with him, not as wards but as family. Wherever he went, they followed, fierce protectors and companions. And in time, the galaxy learned a truth it could no longer deny: bonds forged in fire and blood could not be broken, not by fear, not by war, not even by species. The predator's cubs had chosen the human. And in choosing him, they had changed everything. So when the galaxy whispered warnings about humans, they added one more line, spoken with awe and unease alike. If their predator's cubs trust them, what chance do the rest of us have? And that was enough to make even empires hesitate.